Episode 20 of the podcast, we are going to talk about developmental phases, fear imprint stages, and we're going to talk about aging and how all of those things relate to the grooming process. This is the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Christy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, and a certified professional dog trainer. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. I want to talk a little bit about developmental phases. I was hanging out with some groomers and the topic came up and I thought that might be nice for a podcast. So let's talk a little bit how there are fear imprint phases. There are critical learning phases. There's the adolescence that dogs go through. We have their young adult phase. And then we also have their aging phase with some dementia, disorientation, some eyesight and hearing changes. So what do these things all mean for us as groomers? Well, I think that when they're young, it makes a lot of sense for us to know a little bit more about things like the critical socialization period. So at about 8 to 16 weeks, which, okay, I admit I'm terrible with the whole weeks thing, so I looked it up for months. So about 1.5 months to 4 months old is a really critical time because they are actually learning about everything in their world. And when we're socializing during that period, we want to make sure that everything new is enjoyable. We want to build good experiences. And I've heard it referred to as vaccinating for behavior problems later. Like, how interesting, right? So those are the ages where we're likely to see puppies for their first couple of groomings. I say first couple because that would just be ideal, but realistically, that's when they get their first grooming, is someplace between 1.5 to 4 months. Now, that's a great chance for us to be thinking about, I want everything that happens here during this grooming to be a good experience. And I want to introduce as many tools as possible. And maybe if we don't even use them, that's okay. But to get used to, like, hey, that's a dryer sound. And hey, that's the feeling of a dryer on my fur. But to have an idea that this is so normal, because at that age, they're still gathering information. Their brain is learning everything it can. And the things that are normal during that period become normal and acceptable for the rest of their life. So it's a great time for us as groomers, or for trainers, or for anybody else, to be working on things like, okay, now I'm going to touch your back feet, and I'm going to put my finger in between the pads of your toes, and I'm going to touch you all over and pick you up and hold you close to pick you up and have you around loud noises and look in your mouth and look in your ears. So at that socialization period, it's really important for us to make sure that doesn't become a fight or it doesn't become scary. And to make sure that it doesn't become scary is far more important in that moment than getting something done perfectly. Generally, you know that I'm always going to say that anyway, that what's going on in their brain is super important, but especially at that age where it's really critical that they learn that they're involved in something safe, because they're going to remember it forever, which also means that something scary that happens at that age can also be remembered forever. So if something does happen that is scary, we want to do some damage control. Like, oh, hey, you got a little bit scared there. Let's backtrack and see if we can make that feel okay, right? I mean, we can't just avoid fear forever. Something's going to become scary. So be thinking, though. We always want everything to come out as, oh, this was enjoyable. This wasn't so bad. I'm up on a table, not a big thing. I've got things around me. My mom went, my mom came back, or my dad left. I'm around other dogs. I cannot play with the other dogs, right? There are lots of things that we happen in a shop at that age that's really critical. So then we go into that 4-month to 9-month period, that 17 weeks to 40 weeks. That's kind of the beginning of the teenagers' years, right? So they can really start kind of looking at the world in a different way. Like they start thinking they should be making some decisions. My parents would say I went through that at 13, 14, 15, 16. But they definitely start going through that where they're like, hey, I want to go off and do my own thing, which is why many people contact trainers when a dog turns about 4 months old, because they're like, I don't know. He doesn't want to come when called, because they didn't actually teach it. They were relying on him to just desire to be with them. because until they're about 4 months old, most puppies are like, oh yeah, I want to be with you. And then they hit about 4 months old and they're like, what's that smell? Why are you so needy, Mom? I know where you are. I'll be around the corner, sniffing things, eating frogs. So when we get to about 4 months old is when they're more interested in exploring everything else. Everything else around them is much more interesting. So during that time, that 4 months to 9 month time, right? They're kind of almost getting into their adult size, depending on the breed, of course, but they've definitely like stretched out an awful lot. They've gotten a lot bigger. The whole world is looking different to them. I think some of these larger dogs too, like they wake up in the morning and they're 2 inches taller than they were the day before. They tend to be much more clumsy. Sometimes that can be scary for them. Like, I don't know, I tried to jump on the thing like I always do, and I like flew right off the edge. And, so be thinking about that teen period is so normal. Now, at about a year old, I find that most dogs at a year old are kind of still really gangly adolescents. So that teen period continues on, and they say that about 3 years old, 1 to 3 years old is where most dogs are done growing, and most dogs have somehow reached an adulthood. In my experience, that's more like 3 to 4 years old to reach adulthood, and that about every 6 months, from they're 6 months old, 1 year, year and a half, 2, at about every 6 months, they go through kind of one of those adolescent pushy stages, right? Not because they are bad dogs. They're just being normal. Like they go through this little stage where they're like, I want to make some decisions around here. And when that happens, it's up to us to remember, right, that's the age you're at. Let me backtrack and remind you how we do things here. Right? Now, you guys know I train with positive reinforcement, and so that usually means there's no downside to following my instructions. If I give you instructions and you know how to do them, there's really nothing to rebel against. So I don't get an awful lot of rebellious activity from dogs. In fact, if you make it fun, if I ask one of my dogs to do something, the other one comes running over too, like, wait, I heard you from the other side of the house. I've got some sits. I would like to do that. And it doesn't mean that I'm always using food, but just that I'm using encouragement, praise, petting, toys. All of those things can help with a dog when they're getting into those adolescent phases, right? But they are more likely to start having, like if they're a guardian breed, some of those instincts are going to start rising to the surface at about that age, right? Be thinking about that. Some of the instincts to chase rodents or follow a scent, some of those instincts start very, very young, but they definitely, in that 1 to 3 year range, kind of hit their peak, right? It doesn't mean that we can't teach a dog to not follow their instinct, because we can. Just that, for instance, teaching my border collies to not chase bikes was a hard class for them, right? Think about it as like you were in school, and for some kids, math was hard, and for other kids, it was spelling. Like for me, math was easy, spelling was hard, right? For border collies, it's the don't chase, but I could call them off of a scent easy because they're not beagles, right? Beagles, it'd be harder to call them off of a scent, but chasing bikes, they'd probably be like, I don't know, kind of indifferent, sure. So every dog has its own desires, and every breed has a couple of things too. Like Yorkies and some of those little terriers were bred to wander around all on their own, go find things to kill all day. Like that's a tenacious dog. That's not a couch potato snuggle buddy, right? They can be really, really hardy dogs that weren't bred for a cooperative job. And then they get to that like 1 year to 3 year point, and they start getting into their adolescent phase, and they have this desire to do this thing that they've kind of been bred to do, right? So I want you to be thinking about some of these developmental phases as they grow up can also help us, because I usually tell my customers if they went to a breeder and they know their dog's age to write down these things on a calendar, because sometimes they crop up like clockwork. 1 year, 1.5, 2, 2.5. And then when it crops up, they don't feel like, oh my God, what happened to my dog? He was so good, and now suddenly this crazy thing is happening. Then we're like, oh, right, I'm prepared for it. I remember now that this is something that is likely to happen. and we can work around it. So when we're working with a dog that's one of our grooming dogs, and they're like a year and a half old, and we get them for grooming, and they're just being particularly boisterous, particularly goofy, we can kind of relax a little bit and say, oh, right, that's his age. If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. I'm going to touch briefly here on fear imprint stages because I think they're kind of interesting, but it's hard to nail down a time frame for fear imprint stages. They don't last very long, and different breeds develop at different rates. Usually they are 7 to 8 weeks old, and then again at 7 to 8 months old. And what happens is that things that they thought were pretty normal or whatever, or anything new, they're far more likely to do the duck and cover, oh my God, what the heck is that? Just during that little stage. And so it's really important if we have a dog at either of those ages to also make sure that, all right, I'm going to make sure this is as comfortable as possible. I want you to have a good feeling about all of this. Everything's going to be fine, right? Sadly, that is also like 7 to 8 months. Think about how many dogs get neutered and spayed at 7 to 8 months old, right? So right there, bam, right in the middle of that fear imprint stage, right? Or, they end up at the groomer the first time ever because an owner didn't know, and the dog is totally cast matted, and so I want you to be thinking about that particular age as something really important too, because that dog is not really functioning at an adult level, right? They don't have that brain power yet, but they also could be extra skittish. Now, one of the theories that I've heard about this is that 7 to 8 weeks old is when a puppy would start venturing out a little bit away from mom and the den, right? So anything that nature throws at you at that age, you would be like, oh, if it was scary, I'm just going to avoid that forever. And that's one of the theories, and that at 7 to 8 months old is when a young pup might start actually be exploring more. And things that scare you at that age are just best to never touch again. Except that they live in a very human world, and in our human world, they don't really have the opportunity to say, nope, never mind. You're never going to touch my nails again. I don't like clippers next to my ears, or whatever it was that really got them kind of scared. So it's this extra sensitive time. And like I said, it varies because different breeds mature at different rates. I mean, certainly we know that there are breeds that, can live 10 years longer than some of the large breeds, so they all develop a little bit differently. But to know that there are a couple of ages where a dog can become very, very worried, extra spooky. And like I said earlier with something else, I ask my owners, write it down on the calendar. If you know your dog's age, or you know pretty well, write it on the calendar so that you know to look for it. So that you know this might not be the weekend to bring you to something new, to like try a cookout, to try something new just during that time. Because if you know to look for it, it becomes very obvious, like, oh, right. And definitely it can be very, very like textbook, very, very obvious when you know what you're looking for. So a dog that becomes very, very spooky at that age isn't ruined, which is something that owners worry about, which is part of why I have them write it on the calendar. Like, your dog isn't going to be ruined, right? Like, even if they are frightened by something, there's damage control, right? Just make a note of it and we'll figure out how to work on it. But if we know ahead of time, like, hey, is this dog being particularly scared of something that we've done before? How old is he at this point? And that's an important question, and something I think that you as groomers should be able to look at and say, interesting. How old is this puppy at this point? And is he likely to be extra spooky, extra worried, right? And then they snap out of it. I mean, unless it's just kind of who they are in general. Like a dog who's spooky all the time is going to probably not snap out of it. But I've seen some pretty bold dogs that generally are pretty bold go through this phase, and then they just snap out of it one day like, oh, hey, yeah, that's right. I'm a bold guy. So it's not forever. And the other developmental phase I wanted to talk about a little bit too is I want you to think about aging as a developmental phase. And not that we should be checking in on like how old they are, but to be watching for those signs, because as the dog gets older, they all age at a little different rate, but as they get older, start looking for things like eyesight and hearing changes. Not even necessarily that they've lost their eyesight or they've lost their hearing, but those changes, right? The amount of exercise that they can handle. Because if they're in a grooming shop environment, they may be there all day. And that for some of these dogs, as they get older, could make them frustrated in a way that it never used to, or could make them exhausted in a way that it never used to, right? Some of these dogs start getting a little bit disoriented and a little bit of dementia that can set in. And often that's just stuff that an owner notices and doesn't have a diagnosis from the vet and hasn't been medically tested. And we kind of have to guide them to that. Like, you know what? I want you to talk to your vet if you think he's getting like easily startled, things like that, because there might be something else going on. I think a lot of owners assume that it's because he doesn't hear very well or doesn't see very well, but there could be something else happening. And perhaps even it's just a matter of a dog that as they get older is very sensitive about being touched. Often that can be kind of sore joints, or imagine, from our own point of view, if I had to stand on one foot while someone did something to my other foot, right? I'd handle that differently as a young little kid than I would as a young adult, than I would at my age, which isn't young adult, than I would if I were old, because I'm not old yet, right? So, you think about standing on one foot while somebody does something to your other foot, right? So for some of these dogs, as they get older, I think that sometimes they start getting a little bit fussy about that stuff because they're anticipating that, oh gosh, this is going to be uncomfortable, right? There are ways to make that as relaxing as possible. There are an awful lot of times where I find that dogs just won't lie down on my table. Some of these older dogs just won't lie down on the table. They're like, nope, grooming is standing, But if I can get them to lie down, or if I can get them to let me do stuff while they sit, which can be kind of tricky, but sometimes if they're sitting, you can get a whole bunch of stuff done. Ask them to stand for a short time and let them sit again. So even if it's just a matter of doing it piece by piece, like, okay, I'm going to have you stand up. I'm going to do some on your tail. I'm going to have you sit again, and I'll do something on your ears. And then I'm going to go back to your tail, back to your nose, and back to your tail, back to your foot, just working around them and trying to help them be comfortable. And if they are starting to lose their hearing or having some trouble with vision, be thinking about things that used to be so normal for them may kind of sneak up on them now. There are times where I'm working with a dog who's getting a little bit deaf. I have one dog that in particular who is entirely blind. In fact, her eyes are no longer there. So she doesn't even have eyeballs. She has implants, which, they sprung for implants. She's adorable. But she doesn't even have her eyeballs anymore. She doesn't have eyesight. But her hearing is going a little bit too. And there's a lot more touching and like tapping on a table before I reach for her, or tapping on the floor before I reach for her, before I pick her up, things that I didn't used to have to do, like kind of, say really loud, like, okay, dryer, before I turn on the dryer, things that we're trying to avoid the startle response, because it's when they get startled that they become a little bit afraid. And then that can carry itself on and on once they get a little bit startled and become afraid. There are also times where I'll put a blind dog on my table and kind of walk them close enough to the edge that their paw can feel, oh, there's an edge. Oh, and there's an edge. So there's an edge in front of me, and there's an edge to my left and an edge to my right. And they have a grooming loop on so that they feel like they're holding on to something, Of course, with some of these older dogs, it's not around their neck. It's kind of around like one leg in their chest, but they feel a little bit more secure. And sometimes I'm supporting their weight. So when I worked in shops and I worked with the larger dogs, sometimes that was a matter of me having a knee underneath their belly and supporting their weight. With the little guys, it tends to be, my hand holding up their weight in the middle of their belly, and just kind of giving them something to lean on and to make that as comfortable as possible. But to think about the fact that they are getting older, and some things that they used to think were fine might be really scary. Or they might be easily frustrated just because of the age that they're at. The most that we can do is try to help them be comfortable and avoid frustration. So like, hey, before he gets frustrated, just move on to something else, and to let owners know to go to their vet. Talk to your vet and find out if there's something wrong, if there's something going on. Do some blood work, find out if there's, anything that they can do for it. Because I think a lot of the time owners are like, oh, he's just getting old. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes that also means that there's something they can do to help with your dog's comfort. So I know there's a lot of developmental stuff that I did not cover, but it is only a short podcast. So I want you to think about all these things and how they work in the grooming setting. And for owners to think about how your dog might be reacting to things that you are working on right now in a way that they didn't even a couple of months ago or years ago. And for trainers to be thinking, oh, right, so we have these different developmental phases, and maybe not everybody knows about those. Because I think trainers were very well versed in that, but the groomers might not know. Owners don't know. So for us all to work together and help these dogs have the best situation they can and to help them be great dogs for grooming. So hopefully that helps somebody out there. Have a great week and stay curious. If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video. I'm also happy to come to you if you're near my area in southern New Hampshire. If you're ready to go beyond the podcast, and I hope you do, I've made it really easy for you. If you go to creatinggreatgroomingdogs.com and click on your next step, you'll see all of the options. There's the Scholar Lounge community, there's the Modern Grooming Professional Certification, there's Master Canine Stylist and Professional Canine Stylist Diploma testings, there's the Behavior Lab for coaching and private one-on-one sessions with me, and of course, the Master Groomer Behavior Specialist program. So go to creatinggreatgroomingdogs.com and click on your next step.